Welcome to Crossroads. Is President Trump preparing for a war against Venezuela? Well, Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro is claiming that Trump is in fact preparing for what he calls a new eternal war as he gazes into eternity against the country. And I'll be going to what's happening now with the whole Venezuelan situation right now. Now, another topic also, the former mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, she's launching a brand new campaign allegedly to hold border agents accountable. And some people are saying you're doxing them and you're putting them in danger. Is that the case? We're talking about it. Also, in other news, Trump accused Canada of posting propaganda meant to sway U.S. opinions ahead of a key ruling. And Trump's going after them. They immediately pulled it down, and they're saying sorry. Now, I'm going to these topics a lot more today, so make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, and let's get started. Now, first of all, I want to explain what's happening with Venezuela. You've seen the news. You've seen, Venezuela putting troops and guns and stuff, and they have a guy with literally an old AK-47 looking at the water like he's going to shoot a boat with his AK-47. Well, Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro claims that President Donald Trump is preparing for a new eternal war against the country. And this happens really as the United States is moving additional military forces to the Caribbean. And I want to explain what's going on with this because, frankly, I don't think anybody's really getting to the meat of it. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. Some of this goes back to 2018. And I'll just say right now, I don't think anybody's telling you the real story on it. Let me explain what's actually going on. Now, first off, let me show you some of what's happening on the surface. Newsmax said this. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro said the U.S. government is forging a war against him as the world's largest warship approaches the South American country. It says in a national broadcast on Friday night, Maduro accused the administration, Donald Trump, of fabricating a new eternal war. Basically saying, you're accusing me of being the leader of the cartel. Where is your evidence? We have nothing to do with this. Please, no war. Please, no war. That's what he's saying. Now, it notes the U.S. government has increased the pressure on Maduro by taking the aircraft carrier, USS Gerald R. Ford, which can host up to 90 airplanes and attack helicopters closer to Venezuela. And why does that matter? Well, they're not going to... An aircraft carrier is not an attack vehicle by itself. It's a staging vehicle. And this is actually one of the key powers of the United States, our aircraft carriers. America's aircraft carriers allow us to project power. It's a portable it's a portable runway, basically. We can drive it up to a certain distance from a shore and basically just launch a full-scale war from an aircraft carrier. That's why it matters, right? And of course, they're talking now about ground war or maybe air war against Venezuela. And Maduro said this. He said they promised they would never again get involved in a war. I don't think we've ever said that. And he says they are fabricating a war that we will avoid. Unless they can dodge those bullets, we'll have to see. Now it says Trump has accused him without providing evidence of being the leader of the organized crime gang Tren de Aragua. Now, on this point where it says Trump has accused Maduro without evidence of being the leader of the organized crime gang Tren de Aragua, let me explain this. The media is being dishonest. There's a lot of ridiculous stuff going on. Let me explain what's really going on, okay? This is what's happening. I'll have to break it down into a few points. First off, some of the drug boats being blown up, the ones going there, leaving, they are allegedly tied to Tren de Aragua. Now, Tren de Aragua is a gang. They're basically your foot soldiers. The cartel in Venezuela is the cartel of the Suns. Now, any country knows that gangs work with cartels. Gangs in the United States do the trafficking on the ground for the Mexican cartels. The Chinese Communist Party is the money behind all of them. Gangs and cartels work together. What Trump is accusing Maduro of is being the leader of the cartel of the Suns, the main cartel that facilitates the trade, and Tren de Aragua are the little foot soldiers carrying out the operations. The cartel is the cartel of the Suns. And what's being left out of this, guess who came up with that label? It wasn't Trump, it was Biden. The Biden administration labeled Maduro as the leader of the cartel of the Suns. And all these news outlets saying Trump is saying without evidence are leaving that important part out. That was a Biden policy. The Biden administration said that Nicolas Maduro was the leader of the cartel of the Suns. And again, when it was Biden saying it, all these media now making it sound like it's a big deal without evidence and so on. they're just leaving this out. They're not even telling you this. There were documents from the Biden administration explaining this. They're not being honest with you. Now, the points of the boats being blown up, a big narrative is these are not drug boats, they're fishing boats. And how dare Trump blow up these poor little fishermen? Now, look, I grew up around a lot of different jobs. My family used to own a restaurant called Red's Lobster Dock in Point Pleasant Beach. I used to work the docks. We had a raw bar. I had to unload stuff from the ships coming in, lobsters, clams, everything, right? In the off season, my dad was a monk fisherman. They did deep sea fishing. My step-grandfather used to do commercial fishing for lobster and for monkfish. I grew up around again, commercial fishing. I know what fishing boats look like, okay? Those are not fishing boats. Why do I say that? How do I know that these are not fishing boats based on the imagery? They have nothing that you would need to fish, okay? They don't have nets. And if they're saying these are fishing boats, where's the fishing equipment, okay? There's no nets. There's no equipment for fishing. They're painted blue on top, which you don't do because fishermen typically, you want to have a noticeable color like red or something like that, especially commercial fishermen, because if you're lost at sea, you want to be found. Why would you paint the top of your boat blue to blend in with the water? The only reason you would do that is if you want to blend in with the water, meaning these are not fishermen, and they're painting their boats in a way to blend in with the ocean, meaning they're trying to hide. There's no sensible answer to that other than the idea that no, these are not fishermen. Now, some people are saying, well, they have these like blue barrels. First off, why blue barrels? Why not red? Especially if you lose them or something, you want to be able to scoop them back up. Nothing of this makes sense other than the fact that they're doing things in such a way that makes it look like they're trying to be inconspicuous. I doubt those barrels are being used to hold fish. Again, they do not have nets. The only other way they're going to be fishing without nets is if they have poles. Anybody who's gone on day fishing trips knows you're not going to catch enough fish with poles to fill up like 50 barrels, okay? The entire narrative is stupid. The media telling you this are being disingenuous. They're lying to you. They're being dishonest. They're not telling you history. They're not making the point that Biden had the same policies. You're being lied to left, right, and center. Obviously, these are not fishing boats. There's nothing on them, nothing whatsoever that you would need to be a fisherman. Nothing. Now, also on these points too, what's really going on with Venezuela? Let me explain a few other things. First off, on the drugs. Now, you might say, why is Trump calling out Maduro? Why is Trump calling out now even the head of Colombia right nearby? Remember what Trump said on the campaign trail. When Trump was on the campaign trail, he promised, one of his campaign promises, he said he would use the entire U.S. military to fight the drug trade. He said he would put a naval embargo in place. He said he would use the U.S. intelligence. He would use special operations forces for targeted strikes. I mean, he went on for like 5-10 minutes just explaining piece by piece every military asset he was going to use to utterly obliterate the cartels. And he said in that time that if any country challenges this, if any of these Latin American countries stands up and says, Trump, you cannot do this, if they stand up and say, Trump, how dare you destroy the cartels, what did Trump promise? He said he would expose the connections of those individuals to the cartels. So if the president of a country tries to stop Trump from destroying the cartels, Trump promised that he would expose the connections of that leader to the cartels. That includes governors, that includes mayors, that includes sheriffs, that includes judges. Any of them who try to stop this will be exposed as being connected to the cartels. And the hard reality in Latin America is almost all of the government officials are in some way connected to the cartels. Almost all of them, because if you're not, they kill you. They don't have a choice. In Mexico, you have entire regions of the country that are controlled by the cartels. You have towns and villages that are governed by the cartels. The cartels run the hospitals. The cartels run the food services. The cartels provide the basic means. The cartels control the culture. In these countries, throughout these various areas, the cartels are effectively the governments. And one thing you also had throughout a lot of Latin America too is when these socialist governments came into power, what happened? that was facilitated through an organization between Brazil and Cuba. It was called the Foro ao Sao Paulo, the Forum of Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo, of course, being in Brazil. The Foro ao Sao Paulo included the heads of basically all the socialist governments in all of Latin America. It also included various cartels and various narco-terrorist organizations. Among the groups involved was Shining Path, a narco-terrorist Maoist organization. And what is one of the big policies of the Foro ao Sao Paulo, which facilitated the different campaigns that led to just about every far-left party you have in all of Latin America? They wanted to legalize the drug trade, which means, of course, the government getting involved in the drug trade to some extent, at least turning a blind eye to it, because they say this is the solution of bringing money into our countries, getting rid of the violence, and making sure that we profit with it without taking any of the repercussions, meaning allowing the facilitation of drug trade to the United States. That's what Trump is accusing them of. Meaning they all are part of this, every one of them. Every single one of them who allows this is part of this. And when Trump is calling out the leader of Colombia, that's what he's saying. He's saying you have all these different grow farms, you have all these different drug operations, and you allow it, and by allowing it, you are responsible for it. That's the accusation. This is what was accused, this is what was said, and that is the basis of a lot of these arguments saying you're tied to the cartels. So when they say that there's no evidence, that's your evidence. The policies that allow the open facilitation of the drug trade, and not to mention in Venezuela where the military itself actually works and helps facilitate the drug trade. These are not secrets. The media telling you otherwise are lying to you. Now, the other big piece that's not really being talked about is the Chinese Communist Party presence in Venezuela. Now, some of you might remember hearing a little bit about this. What is China's presence in Venezuela? They have presence throughout Latin America. I mentioned the Foro ao Sao Paulo, which facilitated, again, most of the far-left revolutions, most of the far-left governments, the socialists or communists, whatever you want to call them, even the narco-terrorists. Many of the narco-terrorist organizations were trained in China. They're Maoist. They were trained by the Chinese Communist Party. That includes a lot of them, especially around the tri-border area, which is kind of the main drug hub within South America. That includes the CCP's operations with the Mexican drug cartels, including doing their money laundering, including supplying precursor chemicals, including supplying synthetics. Things like fentanyl, for example, synthetic drugs. The Chinese Communist Party is the kingpin. The Chinese Communist Party is the trainer. The Chinese Communist Party is also involved in the campaigns and the political organizations in most of these countries. And the Chinese Communist Party also does a lot of the big infrastructure projects, which has allowed it to control the economies in many of these countries. In Venezuela, the CCP basically built up most of their economy. It controls most of the infrastructure because, again, these are debt traps where countries and leaders knowingly sell out the future of the countries into debt traps. When they default on those loans, the ownership of various key assets transfers to the CCP. The CCP owns many of these countries. Venezuela is one of them. And this came to a head in 2018. What happened in 2018? In 2018, Venezuela held one of its major presidential elections. Nicolas Maduro was accused of rigging the election. That's controversial to say in the United States, but guess what? Donald Trump said it. When Joe Biden came into office, the Biden administration upheld that accusation. The Biden administration accused Nicolas Maduro, as did Trump, of rigging the election. And Maduro was deemed the unofficial leader of the country. What they did instead, and this was both a Trump policy and a Biden policy, and the bias, one-sided media now making a big stink about this, they're not telling you that when Biden was doing it, a lot of them supported this. When Biden was doing this, these media were telling the other side. When Biden was doing it, all these media were licking the boots and eating out of the hands. And they're just lying to you now. They're not telling you this. The Biden policy was this. They recognized the government in exile under Juan Guaido as the legitimate government of Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro was deemed as a criminal cartel that had seized control of the country. And he was deemed, again, the leader of the cartel of the Suns, and the Venezuelan military was deemed basically the armed wing of the cartel of the Suns. That was a Biden policy. Now, what else happened? There were huge protests in Venezuela, again, during the 2018 elections. It looked like there was going to be a power shift Trump was still in office at the time during his first term. This is right during the middle of it. He was dealing with a lot of other things. It was a brief issue, but this is what actually happened. The United States, under Trump, during his first term, was talking about intervening in Venezuela. Then what happened? Russia and the Chinese Communist Party went in to, quote-unquote, defend their investment. Defend their investment. Because why? Their money built Venezuela. Venezuela is a puppet state. They control Venezuela. And when they sent their peacekeeping forces to put down the protests and instability and stabilize the situation, what else happened? Meaning, of course, they crushed dissent. Russia threatened the United States during Trump's first term. And the exact quote they said was there would be bloodshed. Bloodshed. Russia said that if the United States intervened in Venezuela, there would be, quote unquote, bloodshed. You can look it up. This is all public. Now, Trump, of course, backed off during the time. It was very interesting. And China and Russia stabilized Venezuela. Guaido went into exile. He's now deemed the government in exile, upheld again by the Biden administration. And when Trump, of course, left office, because shortly after that, Trump went right into the whole election problems of 2020, 2019, campaign trail, whole 9 yards. There were other issues he had to take care of. And the story of Venezuela kind of fell to the sidelines. That's the real story. What else happened? Now, the last point in all of this is what happened shortly after, right? So again, Venezuela is stabilized. The government in exile leaves. Maduro seizes power. He's deemed the unofficial leader of the government. The Biden administration, even a few months before the 2024 election, the Biden administration was talking about a possible regime change in Venezuela. The media telling you this is a Trump thing or not being honest with you, that was also a Biden thing. This is not a new policy. This is the stance, I'd say, of the U.S. government, regardless of who's in office. And this really took a head over something else. The last point I'll make when it comes to what's really going on in Venezuela is this. Just a few months ago, right? Just a few months ago, Maduro and Lula, the leader of Brazil, were talking about working together to wage a war and annex parts of Guyana. Guyana is a country just north of Venezuela. A few years back, they discovered one of the largest oil reserves in the entire world. And guess what? Surprise, everybody wants it. Everybody wants it. Now, there's a few different ways of dealing with a large oil supply when you want it. One is that you do business with them. Two is you steal it. The U.S. government currently is, well, major U.S. companies are actually involved with the government of Guyana doing, again, the work of actually mining and exporting the oil. One of the major companies there active is Exxon. And so, we're not taking them over. We're doing legitimate business with them. Guyana is getting very rich from it. Nobody talks about Guyana. Why? It's because they don't have any problems, right? But they have a problem at their door, which is Venezuela. And what else happened? Well, Venezuela now claims they have historical ownership over the part of Guyana that has all these oil supplies. Does that sound familiar? Yes. Why? It's the same narrative Russia has for invading Ukraine, and it's the same narrative that China has for trying to take over the South China Sea and Taiwan. We used to own it, therefore it's ours. That's the narrative, which is not true, by the way. It's a bunch of nonsense. And so what happened? Maduro was going to invade Guyana. They were going to start a regional war. Then what happens? China was going to come in and mine the oil and work with Maduro, and they make money. What else was going to happen? Venezuela, not just them, but also Brazil were going to get involved. And when you understand that they're also working with Colombia and the drug trade there and the cartels there, they wanted to create effectively what would be a major nation-state drug empire working with the CCP as one of the major economic centers and powers within all of Latin America. They would dominate Latin America. This would also cause a major exodus of not just drug trade and so on, defended by the CCP very likely, but also of just human movement, people migrating, quote unquote, to escape the conflict wherever else. And where are they going to head? Right to the United States. This would also cause a mass exodus to the United States. It would destabilize the region. It would cause huge problems for the U.S. It would probably get us involved in a war. One of the major advisors to Xi Jinping, a man named Qin Canrong, even said they wanted this They wanted the U.S. to get pulled into 4 major wars, one with Russia, one in the Middle East against a terrorist group, one in Latin America, they talked about Brazil, and then one, of course, being China's invasion of Taiwan. That is the stage set for World War III, which the CCP openly discusses. This is what they were doing. This is what they were going to do. And so with Trump now saying that's not going to happen, we're going to blow up your little boats, not going to happen, try to invade Guyana, it's not going to happen. What else happened? Just a few months ago, Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited this region. He actually met with the leaders of Guyana, and he warned Maduro in Venezuela, if you try to conquer parts of Guyana, there will be consequences. And I think it's no coincidence that shortly after that statement, Maduro did not back off. You now see them blowing up these drug boats. You now see them talking about, again, land operations. You now see them talking about launching strikes on key places within Venezuela. That is the real context of what is happening. And frankly, those of you not telling you this, you should ask why they're not telling you this. Maybe they don't know, maybe they're being dishonest, but basic knowledge of history and following the story would tell you all of this. And that is what's really going on right now in Venezuela. That's the real story. Now, meanwhile, on another topic, it's not an election year technically, not a big one at least, but there are some key elections coming up in the United States. And the Justice Department under Trump, they're now taking serious steps to make sure there's not any funny business, let's say, in the local elections in the United States. I'll be talking more about what they're putting in place after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Phillip. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. There are some big elections coming up in the United States, and a lot of the attention right now is on New York City, right, with Mondami. But there are a few other big ones as well. And the Justice Department, they're now taking steps to make sure that there is not any funny business this time with the elections, like somebody finding a case of ballots in the trunk of their car and saying, hey, why don't we count them too? PJ Media says this. It says the Trump Department of Justice has agreed to send election monitors to 5 counties in California and 1 county in New Jersey following requests from local Republican Party officials in those states. Meaning, you're going to have Trump Justice Department officials monitoring the elections. And so if they say the toilet overflowed and they need to freeze the elections, and if they say that they're getting, ballots they're finding in random places like their pockets or under tables or something like that, they might have to have a closer look and say, did that really happen? Why don't we have a look? If they have pristine ballots that look like they're photocopied with no down ballot voting, maybe those need to be re-examined. And the Trump administration is now taking steps to make sure that if there are things like that, they're going to have a closer look. Now it says here, New Jersey Republicans based their request on voter fraud allegations that have historically plagued Passaic County. Just last weekend, it says, the Democratic members of the county's Board of Elections, quote, blocked the use of security cameras in ballot storage areas and refused to require a sign-in log for workers with access to mail-in ballots, reported the New York Times, of all places. So, secure elections, but you're not allowed to have security cameras. Secure elections, but not only are we removing the security cameras, but we're also removing the process whereby people visiting that have to sign in. Why would you do that? Why would you remove the safeguards to make sure that random people are not going in there? And then why are you removing the safeguards to make sure that people who do go randomly in there undocumented are then able to do whatever they do unmonitored? How would that make the election safe? What would the logic be behind that? Why would somebody ever believe that's a good idea? What could their intent be? Well, we don't know, but maybe we'll find out. It says New Jersey in the midst of a tightening race for governor, while California's Proposition 50 will redraw the state's congressional districts in a brazen attempt to give the state up to 5 more Democratic congressmen. And people are saying, well, didn't Texas do that too? Okay, so where California is at currently is where Texas will be after redrawing the maps. California has already done what they're accusing Texas of with redrawing maps. They've already done it. When California redraws its maps yet again, you'll have a state where close to, not fully, but close to half of the voters are Republican. And Republicans have almost zero representation. That's what they're doing, right? Now it says this. In California, the Department of Justice officials will monitor polling places in 5 counties: Kern, Riverside, Fresno, Los Angeles, and Orange. I should note that Riverside and Orange County, those are, a lot of these are more conventionally like Republican areas. That's where I'm kind of from, at least. And so, these areas are more conservative, but as they redraw the maps, they're trying to make it so that it's no longer that way. And notes it as one might imagine, California governor and likely Democratic presidential candidate Gavin Newsom is not happy as they send election monitors there. And notes a spokesperson for Newsom claimed, quote, "This administration has made no secret of its goal to undermine free and fair elections," said Brandon Richards, and notes that deploying these federal forces appears to be an intimidation tactic meant for one thing: suppress the vote. How dare you want surveillance cameras in the places where we keep the ballots? How dare you make it so people have to sign a document stating that they're going in this place so we know who was there during a certain time if something were to happen? How dare you put in the standards that even a third world country has, not even up to that threshold, in fact? Because how else can we have fair elections if our elections are not more secure than Afghanistan? Now look, as this happens, California is crying foul over this point because the point they're making, and this actually is a valid one, California is saying these are local elections, state elections, not federal elections. And there are different rules for this. Federal elections have a lot more standards. Federal elections, if you're an illegal alien or a non-citizen, you're not allowed to vote. In some local elections, they can actually change laws to even allow for non-citizens to vote. And so local election systems actually operate in a whole different set of laws, which are more run by the states. The Trump administration is basically saying, okay, yeah, but there are some laws and the federal government should be involved in some way. And if you're removing even the most basic safeguards to make sure the election is fair and to make sure that nobody's doing things that they shouldn't be doing, what is your justification for that? You know what I mean? And so that's their argument for it. Will that stand up? We'll have to see, because almost guaranteed there will be lawsuits. They're going to challenge it. And I guarantee you right now that if a conservative wins in one of these districts, there are going to be people saying that Trump rigged the elections by making sure they did not rig the elections. Now, another topic, the former mayor of Chicago is launching a brand new campaign, allegedly to hold border agents accountable. The individual, former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Remember her? Well, in a recent interview on Fox 32's The Chicago Report, she announced she's going to be starting something new. It's called the ICE Accountability Project. The goal of it, well, they want to unmask ICE agents that she says are committing crimes. And this is her announcing it. Watch this.
Yeah, we're calling it the ICE Accountability Project, and it really has three components to it. One is we want to create a centralized archive of all the purported evidence of criminal actions on the part of ICE and CBP agents across the region. It's out there, but it's in different places, and it makes it difficult to aggregate the information. We want to create a portal where what's happening real time can be centralized and then put out for the public to view. Number two, and importantly, we want to unmask the ICE agents, the CBP agents who are committing crimes in our city. So the normal immigration activity, not that.
Now, what's important here, this is not just about unmasking ICE agents in Chicago, which is, why would you do that in the first place? Unless your intent is to maybe terrorize them or pressure them or threaten them or their families, which is why they wear masks in the first place. They used to not wear masks. They started dealing with threats to themselves and their families, which is why they started wearing them. This will also create an archive with the evidence documenting them, tracking them, monitoring them, unmasking them, and also a portal for the public. Now, you might say, if this is to hold them accountable, why make it public? Well, this is a bit more on this. This is from the Fox 32's Chicago report. Watch this.
And we start the process of unmasking the agents. Even though they're wearing masks, every single one of them has a towel.
You say unmasking, they're going to say you're going to dox them, and that's why threats against them are up.
They are on public property, out in the open. We have an absolute right under our Constitution to be able to document what's happening. Every single one of those agents, height, weight, hair color, they wear their vests in a particular way. They're wearing insignias, even the masks that they wear, the shoes that they wear, the cars that they're driving. We have a right to compile that information and put together a profile of each of these agents that's alleged to have committed crime. This is not about doxing them. This is not about putting them in danger, and I'm sure we're going to hear that. But as residents of this city in the metropolitan area, we have a right to know who's doing what, and supposedly in our name, but we believe that they are committing crimes and it needs to be investigated, and then let a grand jury, let the prosecutor make a determination.
Are you saying you're going to compile this information and then take legal action, civil action?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to compile the information, and hopefully it's going to compel local law enforcement, the state's attorney, and others to do their jobs and investigate the allegations of serious crimes being committed.
Interesting. Now, we'll see how this goes, right? It does, to me, sound like the purpose of this is to pressure individual agents, not to challenge the legality of the overall policies from the Trump administration. And what's the basis of that? Why do I say that? This is why. Normally, if you're going after the legality of the operations, are they breaking the law? Are these illegal operations? Well, normally you'd expect them to question the legality of them by bringing cases against the agencies themselves. So if Chicago believes, for example, that ICE agents are operating illegally, they would take the videos of the operations of the agents and they bring complaints directly against the ICE department itself, not against individual agents. If they have operational problems, right, which is what they're really going after, they're saying that the way they operate is problematic. Well, if you have evidence of illegal activity against agents, that's part of the case, right? That's part of the complaint, that's part of the court case, and again, it's against the broader operations. That's not what they're doing. This seems a lot different when the operation is instead to attempt to identify individual agents, meaning they're not going after the agency, they're going after the individual. Why would you do that? You would go after the individual as an act of basically mental pressure. You want to terrorize them. You want to make them afraid to do their job. You want to make them think, if I go out, I'm going to be recorded and people have operations to dox me publicly and my family might get death threats or somebody might shoot me. Because as we do know, there have been several attacks on ICE, including shootings where people have fired at them, shot them. One individual was shot in the neck, which was actually tied to an operation by Antifa. People were arrested on it. You had another incident not too long ago in Texas where someone fired a gun into the ICE facility. Ironically, only hit people being detained by ICE, didn't hit any agents. which the media then lied to you about also, made it sound like someone was attacking, migrants. They were shooting at ICE agents. Again, a lot of dishonesty here, a lot of misrepresentation, and a lot of just weird mental gymnastics. The only reason they would do this is a form of basically ideological terrorism. They want to make people afraid to do their jobs. On that point, I would note that documenting each person involved is not unheard of. And this is the other side of it, which we should acknowledge. Now, with the Trump administration, for example, what are they doing? Remember, the Trump administration wants to identify every single FBI agent involved in any way with January 6th. And they want to have the names public, the FBI, and so on. They were trying to keep those names hidden because they're also worried that the FBI agents involved with January 6th might be doxxed or attacked or threatened. So why would they want that? Well, they say accountability. And you could argue the same narrative is being used, being fair. The same narrative is being used by people challenging ICE, accountability. And also, the reality is, if Democrats come into office after Trump, they're probably going to bring criminal charges against ICE agents in the same way the Trump administration is talking about criminal charges or just firing people involved with J6. And so I would say that is the broader context of it. What is the effect of this? Well, ICE agents will probably be too afraid to do their jobs. And if they do, they're going to be operating with this mental pressure, right? Now, look, in other news, though, Trump is accusing Canada of posting propaganda in the United States and saying this propaganda was meant to sway opinions, including of the courts, trying to basically mess up our entire legal system right ahead of a major ruling. And in response to this, Donald Trump is putting additional tariffs on Canada. This is what Trump said on Truth Social. He said Canada was caught red-handed putting up a fraudulent advertisement on Ronald Reagan's speech on tariffs. The Reagan Foundation said that they, quote, created an ad campaign using selective audio and video of President Ronald Reagan. The ad misrepresents the presidential radio address and, quote, did not seek nor receive permission to use and edit the remarks. The Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute is reviewing its legal options in this manner, meaning Canada, for some reason, took quotes from Ronald Reagan out of context, edited them, maybe violated copyright law, and then posted it right ahead of a major Supreme Court case in the United States with the alleged intent, according to Trump, of basically swaying the judges right ahead of a major ruling, interfering in the legal system of the United States in a way that would financially benefit them, because Canada does not want tariffs. Trump said this: the sole purpose of this fraud was Canada's hope that the United States Supreme Court will come to their rescue on tariffs and that they have used for years to hurt the United States. Now the United States is able to defend itself against high and overbearing Canadian tariffs and those from the rest of the world as well. On that point, Canada's, of course, using information from, quotes from Ronald Reagan slightly out of context. Slightly out of context, to be honest. Making points against the use of tariffs. The reality is Canada has tariffs against the United States. Canada heavily uses tariffs. So if Canada does not like tariffs, then why do they use tariffs? Is Canada critical of its own tariffs, or are they only critical of tariffs when the United States does it? Is Western Europe critical of tariffs? Well, they're critical of American tariffs. Are they critical of their own? This is the problem with these international narratives. It's like a criminal who's a thief saying that they oppose thievery, but they're thieves. They make their living off robbing people, but they oppose robbery. They oppose robbery when it's against them, but they don't oppose robbery when they're doing it. That's the real narrative here. These countries dislike tariffs when they're impacted by them, but they use tariffs. So if they don't like tariffs, then why do they use them? Good question, right? Because remember, the broader context of Trump's tariffs is that it's reciprocal. We will match your tariffs against us. That is the narrative. Get rid of your tariffs, our tariffs go away. Get rid of your trade barriers, our trade barriers go away. Get rid of your imbalanced trade deals with us and find things that work, and we'll get rid of ours. That is the basis of Trump's trade policy. The rough part with all of this, it turns out, America has basically been subsidizing the economies, the military, and the healthcare systems of most countries. We've been subsidizing the Canadian defense. We've been subsidized by, again, basically covering the cost of military. We've been subsidizing Canada's low cost of medicine, including by working as kind of the pressure valve, where if people have to wait in a huge line to get medical care, they come to the United States, ironically. We've also been giving very bad trade deals for us that work very much in their favor, and we allow them to tariff American goods at extreme rates. If they oppose this, then why do they do it? Good question, right? Trump said Ronald Reagan loved tariffs for purposes of national security and the economy, but Canada said that he didn't, suggesting that Canada did not give full context on what Ronald Reagan actually believed in as it related to tariffs, meaning they took it out of context and they did not provide accurate information. And Trump said their advertisement was to be taken down immediately, but they let it run last night during the World Series, knowing that it was a fraud because of their serious misrepresentation of the facts and hostile act. Again, interfering with America's legal system. Trump said, I am increasing the tariff on Canada by 10% over and above what they're paying now. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, how bad is a 10% tariff on Canada? Let's go back in time. When Trump was still on the campaign trail, remember what happened. Trump was talking about 10%, 20% tariffs on Canada. Look, a 10% or 20% tariff now seems like a godsend. You have countries like China facing like 130% tariffs, all right? A 10% tariff sounds like a godsend. But that was a big deal before. When Trump was on the campaign trail, remember, Justin Trudeau, then the head of Canada, came and visited Trump at Mar-a-Lago when Trump was not even president yet to beg him, and basically said a 10% tariff would destroy the Canadian economy. They now have much higher than 10%, and Trump's putting an additional 10% on them. This could actually be detrimental to the Canadian economy. This could destroy the Canadian economy. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? It's bad for Canada. It's bad for you know what everything else aside, what is a very important U.S. ally. It's bad for that. It's good for bringing business back to the United States. It's good for undoing the bad business deals we made with Canada that allowed our businesses and factories and major offices and major businesses to move slightly north of the border. Again, siphoning off American jobs and money. It was great. You know, it's going to affect that. But it is going to be detrimental to the Canadian economy. Now, Epoch Times said this. U.S. President Donald Trump says he is hiking tariffs on Canada by 10% over the continuation of an anti-tariff ad by the provincial government of Ontario, meaning it's not the entire government of Canada. It's like one province that did this, and Canada's probably very mad at that little government right now. That Trump says misrepresents a speech by the late U.S. President Ronald Reagan on trade protectionism. And that's that Ontario Premier Doug Ford said on October 24th that he will pause the $75 million campaign ad in response to Trump's termination trade discussions with Canada on October 23rd because of it, but only after the weekend's World Series games, meaning they ran it during the most important time and then canceled it. And notes that Canadian imports to the United States are currently subject to 35% tariff. It's huge. Even aside from this, that's huge, right? It says with exemption applied to products covered by the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, which is also a big deal because technically that was a Trump trade agreement that replaced NAFTA. NAFTA was a terrible agreement for American businesses. Great for Mexico, great for Canada, but a lot of Americans lost their businesses because of NAFTA. Trump's U.S.-Canada agreement, U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement replaced NAFTA. It still was very bad for the U.S. economy, but Trump kept it in place. And maybe that's to give them, a little olive branch, who knows. But it notes this. Canadian products are also subject to sectoral tariffs, including those applied to steel, aluminum, copper, auto, and lumber, which, for those who know the Canadian economy, is basically their entire economy. The Canadian economy is energy exports, it's autos, and it's timber, right, lumber. And them basically, their entire economy is sending that to the United States, okay? Trump is already talking about making America an energy powerhouse. We basically don't need to buy energy from Canada. He's talking about bringing, again, car manufacturing back to the United States. A lot of the economy, not just in Canada, but also Mexico, is actually automobiles and like auto manufacturing and parts. If we bring that back to the United States, it's gonna massively upend the economies of both Canada and Mexico. And another key export of Canada is timber. It's lumber. It's wood, right? Americans, unlike most of like Western Europe and Canada, we still build a lot with wood. We're kind of known for this, and people are like, why do you build it? And you have these fires. We like natural fiber, what can I say? And so America does import a lot of lumber. Trump has said also we don't need to be doing that. We can get it from Alaska or somewhere else. So we'll see what happens with this. But basically, they're keeping some of this in place. We still buy it. Trump's saying we don't need you anymore. Now, it says here, Dominic LeBlanc, the Canadian minister responsible for U.S. trade, stressed that trade negotiations with the United States is a federal responsibility, and that Ottawa stands, quote, ready to build on the progress made in constructive discussions with American counterparts over the course of recent weeks. So they're doing a 180. In other words, Ottawa had a bad moment and spent $75 million creating propaganda to, of course, sway a Supreme Court decision and then lie to the American people. But suddenly changed their mind and they're saying, you know what, we're really sorry, and why don't we keep talking? So that's where things are at. What's going to happen with that? Some people say it's going to push Canada closer to China. That's not the case. Actually, just being blunt, in some ways, Canada's tougher on China than the United States is in some ways. Some of the trade barriers that put in place, the blockages and things like the Confucius Institutes, Canada's actually pretty dang good on it. The United States could actually learn a thing or two on some fronts, not all of them, when it comes to Canada's policies pushing back against the CCP. But again, we'll see where it goes because this is all being negotiated still. All right, let's add questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. And let's see here. First question. Denise B. You're saying and $75 million for that ad. I thought Canada said that they were economically hurt by American tariffs. They apparently have plenty of money to throw away. Yeah, right? They have plenty of money to spend, as they just demonstrated. They don't need all that trade, right? I've said it before. The problem you have, it's actually interesting. America is regarded as kind of like the global consumer. Americans buy stuff. You don't find that in a lot of countries. It's interesting, right? It's very interesting when you get into the nuances of how economies work. Because how do economies work? You could say that most money is funny money. You could argue we trade paper for money, like legal Tinder. Traditionally, humans, we trade like shiny rocks for is our legal Tinder, like gold, right? We literally trade paper and shiny rocks, okay? If you want to break down like human nature. But what it does is it represents labor. Those shiny rocks and that paper represents labor. And it represents a perceived value, right? That's if you want to like break it down in caveman terms, that's how money works. It means that you've contributed a certain amount to keeping things running. You've worked somewhere. You've provided a service, and you've done something that obviously somebody wants. The basis of a free market is that the free market responds to what people want. Because if people don't want it, you don't make money. It doesn't work, you go out of business. And so you likely get involved in things that people do want. I grew up working in tons of businesses. My dad's kind of like a bit of like a Renaissance man, right? He did, commercial fishing. He owned several restaurants, juice bars, construction. I've worked in some ways in most of these areas too, here and there, except for I worked the docks, but I did not actually go on the boats and do commercial fishing. But, that's based on, again, what's demanded by the public, right? One of my dad's theories with restaurants is that people always eat. People always want food. And so if you start a restaurant, you're always going to have something people want, right? It's one of those things that is always in demand, right? It's a way of thinking. What do people want and how do I provide it? Now, that only works if people spend money. If people take their money and they hoard it, if people take their money and they bury it in the backyard, like pirates, if people take their money and they shove it in the bank and never touch it again, it doesn't actually circulate within the economy. And Americans, for better or for worse, we're kind of known to blow our money. It's a reputation we have. You don't have that in every country. In particular, a lot of Asian countries, except for the ultra rich, they tend to hold on to their money. Their idea with wealth is preserving wealth. They believe it's tied in with virtue and karma, and that you should sit on it. And so they don't really spend money. Really, when it comes to America, I would point to the American idea rooted in religion and Christianity, where the idea with wealth is that you should do good with it. And by doing good with it, you basically expand you do God's work, right? You do God's work with your money. And so Americans are more apt to spend our money. We don't sit on our money. We enjoy our money. And by enjoying our money, we exchange money. When you go to a restaurant and you give the waiter a tip, or you buy a steak or something like that, what does it do? The money from that steak pays for the restaurant owner, the money for that steak pays for the workers, the money for that steak pays the rent, the money for that steak even goes down the line to the people who did the logistics and picked it up from the grocery store, or the wholesaler, the people who run the grocery store or the wholesale facility, the truckers who transported it, the processing facilities that processed it, the ranchers who raised the cows. And, that entire line of jobs is sustained by the guy going out and paying money and buying that steak. That's the way an economy works. When the guy stops buying the steak, the entire market for that, the entire industry, every job, the truckers, the freezers, the guy who manufactures the truck, the guy who builds the freezer to keep the meat cold, every single piece of this, the guy who makes the plates, the guy who makes the fork that you eat the steak with and the knife you cut it with, the guy who manufactures the table at which you sit. If you stop buying the product, every single piece of that market disappears. So Americans were known to be the guy who buys the steak, right? We're the global consumer. Americans consume just massively. And, some people say, well, geez, why don't you run out of money when you're just buying stuff? The simple reason is because we support economies by doing it. When we buy the steak, the money doesn't disappear. When we buy the steak, the money circulates within our economy. And it means that the guy who works at the restaurant can also buy a steak. The guy who drives the truck can buy a steak. The guy who manufactures the refrigerators can buy a steak. Because the money circulating with the economy does not disappear. It goes into other people's pockets, and we just kind of exchange it like this. A good economy functions like a body's circulatory system. Now, this is the problem when you have basically money being sent outside your country. When you have people illegally entering and sending money back home, it's like a parasite, right? It's like blood being sucked out, right? So it flows out of your country into another country. It's like an artery, a trade barrier. Or let's say if we move a factory to China, it's like an artery gets hit and your blood is spraying out. Your wealth is spraying somewhere else, right? It's like an artery gets hit. And the American body, our economic body, basically is being bled dry. You have locusts coming in and devouring it and going back to where they came from. You have people siphoning out the blood of America through foreign manufacturing and foreign investment. You have us subsidizing and paying for economies in other places where people use our money for their economies, but don't give anything back to us. And so that's the state of America. And, of course, the people now being told, okay, you can no longer feed on the American body, they're not happy about it. If you want to really break it down, this is the reality of the world. America is the capitalist. The rest of the world, for the most part, is in some way more socialist than we are. And so the socialists, how do they survive? They feed on the capitalists. They seize the means of production, they seize the wealth, and they feed off the hardworking. Americans work very hard. We're known for it, and the socialists typically do not. And of course, they've been feeding on the body of America. And now that America is saying, "Hey, feeding time's over. Time to get a job. Hey, quit living in my basement. Time to go in the real world, kid," and kick them out of the basement. A lot of them are very unhappy about it. And that is the reality right now as you see all these trade things get redone, as you see American manufacturing returning, as you see trade barriers going up, reciprocal to what they do to us. We're saying, look, you've been draining us dry, and we're not going to have it anymore. And you can cry about it, you can make a fuss about it, but no more. The locusts, we're going to send the locusts back. They can no longer devour us and do this. We're going to get our factories back, and that's the policy. And people are saying, well, it's wrong to do that. It's not very nice because it's been the way the world has worked for a long time. But really, how do you solve an unhealthy system? You make it healthy again. And maybe by doing this, it will encourage other countries to develop economies that are not dependent on siphoning things out of the United States. I think that is the logic behind it. Ashley from California, you're saying, why do people care more about ICE agents doing their job versus the illegals here breaking the law and draining our resources? Yeah, right. There was a report, I want to show you maybe in a future episode, there was a report that came out that found about half of illegal aliens were defrauding the United States. That's a big deal, right? They're saying about 50% of migrant households receive one form at least of major government assistance. I don't know if you saw the reports yesterday. There were a lot of people actually, and the people say, "Oh, that's racist." It's reality, right? There were a lot of people pointing to something very concerning, where in North Carolina and other parts of the U.S., a lot of influencers are looking at crime stats, and they were looking at the public information on criminals, right? And you had all these very obvious Latinos and so on, and their race was listed as white or non-Hispanic. You had black guys listed as white, and people are saying, well, geez, this doesn't seem right. Why are you calling? Are there cases where white, maybe it's a problem, are there white people being listed as Hispanic or whatever else? No, it's only the other way around. And so the reality is, when they say that illegal immigrants commit less crime than the majority of the country of Americans, let's put it this way. They're one of the largest criminal demographics in America, right? And if you're saying that, well, they commit less than 50% of the crime or whatever else, that's still a lot of dang crime. And of course, if they're mislabeling things, which they are, if when people are arrested, they're not asking them legal status, it means the stats don't work, meaning we don't even have statistics on it. It's also problematic, too, when you find that there is massive fraud taking place, that actually illegally entering the United States is a felony, but almost never prosecuted as a felony. It's prosecuted as a misdemeanor, if at all. That when people are arrested, they're not asked their migrant status, that crimes are actually being downgraded to misdemeanors even when they're felonies to protect them from deportation, that there are things like this happening, and Americans have been effectively the victims of it. I had a conversation with a friend recently talking about this, and he said, the problem you have with some of these countries is, and he's a migrant, right? A legal migrant. He said the problem you have with some of these countries is, they don't in some of these countries like Iran, like Mexico, like different parts of different countries, right? If you're not a little dishonest in some of those countries, if you're not a little secretive, people will call you stupid. They'll say you're a good person, but the world is going to devour you. If you come from China, it's very common thinking. For example, if you're not a little deceptive, the world will devour you. They think a clever person is a smart person, a devious person is a smart person. If you're not cheating a little bit, if you're not robbing a little bit, if you're too honest, they think the world will devour you. Which in their countries might be partly true, right? And so when they come here and, for example, they have to be asked in a form, what are your foreign holdings? What is your business? What is, they ask questions about all kinds of things. They usually don't, if the difference of having to pay a huge tax or no taxes or even getting government services is writing yes instead of no on a little checkbox, they're going to write the thing that benefits them because culturally that's just where they come from. And so this is why that report just came out where it said about 50% of illegal immigrants and migrants are defrauding the United States. That's a lot of fraud, right? That's a lot of fraud. If you or I were to do that, we'd go to prison. When these people do it, they get protected. So why is that? It's because people are saying, well, it's better to keep them here and allow them to commit crimes than it is to deport them. And so people are so against deportations that they're willing to allow for major criminality against the United States on things that the American citizens would go to jail for a long time if we did. So why is that, right? You tell me. All right, another question. James Dyson is saying, I don't know, Josh. Orange County OC is turning a little purple in the past decade. Yeah, I know. Well, and I know that there are different arguments. You're talking about Orange County in California, which is it's kind of between Los Angeles and Riverside, right? James, I know you know as well. I think I've seen you out there. Orange County, Epic Times, we have a good office there. I do speaking events there sometimes. In fact, next month in November, I'll be doing a big event there with Rob Schneider. So if anyone's out in Orange County next month, I'll give you more updates soon. When we get a little closer, we'll be doing a big event with Rob Schneider in Orange County. Orange County used to have one of the best members of Congress, in my opinion, which was Representative Wolf. And he was very tough on the CCP, very, very, very tough on the CCP. He was one of the major figures to really speak out against Chinese, crimes against humanity, against Chinese problems. He got pushed out, and you could argue why that happened. I know there were a lot of allegations that there was funny business with the elections. My assumption is those allegations is why the Trump administration right now is sending the Justice Department to actually have election monitors in Orange County, because there were a lot of allegations there was funny business in the election system. Orange County was one of the few Orange County and Riverside, some of the few areas that are still pretty solid Republican, all right, for the most part, at least used to be. And again, in both areas, there's a lot of allegations of funny business. Now, I originally came from San Diego. Growing up in San Diego, it was a very conservative area, county. And, part of that is because, it doesn't really show up in polls because a lot of it's military. We have some of the major military bases there. You have the major naval bases, way down closer to the border, which is where a lot of my family's from. Where you have a lot of like the Filipino neighborhoods, like National City. Major ports, major military bases. You have the Navy SEALs training base in Coronado, right? A little north of there, you have Camp Pendleton, just what is it, north, I believe, of Oceanside. Go inland more, you have all kinds of Air Force bases. A lot of San Diego is military. The problem with military is it's a lot of it is sometimes out of state votes. So while like everybody and their cousin might be like a little more conservative, a lot of them will be voting out of state. I can tell you growing up, I grew up kind of in a military household. My grandpa was, he was a retired Marine, a Marine captain, but, because it was a multi-generational household, that was kind of my family. and then neighbors and so on, being in the Marines. And so, with that, a lot of when I was in San Diego, my perception to California was that everybody and their cousin was a conservative. Like I knew very few people who were not. And that was my understanding of California. I don't think I met a person who was against guns until I was in my mid-teens. Like the idea that somebody would be against guns did not even occur to me. Living in San Diego, it did not even occur to me because I heard so little of it. Just explaining, where the California I grew up in. And, for a lot of people in these areas, going from that to where it's at now, you feel like you're living in a different country. When I go now to like Sunset Cliffs, one of my favorite beach, I don't recognize it. When I go to OB, I don't recognize it. I feel like a foreigner in my own home when I visit there because it's a lot of illegal immigrants now, like a lot of illegal immigrants. And look, I'm talking about like in my family, I have very old Mexican, by marriage, very old Mexican family, people who were there when, when America got control of California, right after the Mexico-American War. And those older types, they don't call themselves Mexicans, they call themselves Spaniards. They say that they're Spanish and Native American. They don't call themselves Mexican. And so, we have a lot of that old culture. The newer ones, like the real illegal immigration, has utterly changed the state, has completely changed it. I don't recognize it anymore. And, the problem is, what are the major political issues? Republicans are talking about mass deportations. Democrats are talking about protecting them. What's going to happen when you're able to vote? Hey, you become a citizen because your parents, were illegal aliens, but you're born here. And, one party's saying they're going to deport your parents, and the other party's saying they're going to let them stay forever and give them citizenship. Who are you going to vote for? So, these policies of allowing mass illegal immigration, and one saying we can't allow, the other saying we will, changes the voting dynamic. It changes how people vote. And people will vote in their own interest. This is, when you get down to all of it, why do they say that economy matters so much? It's the same reason that a person whose parents might be deported is going to vote for the party to protect their parents. People vote for their own interest. They will vote not for what is best for the country, not for what is best for their neighbor, not for what is best for the future of the country. They will vote for what is best for them, most people. And I think that is the reality. That is what has changed California and what will change the rest of the country if it's allowed to go on that trajectory. So, we'll see where it goes. All right, that's it, everyone. Questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat for tomorrow because we'll be talking about more topics tomorrow. I also want to hear what you think about all of this. Do you feel that illegal immigration has changed the area you live? Am I only seeing this because I grew up right next to the border, right? I grew up I could drive 20 minutes to Mexico, and we used to go hunting there when I was a kid. We'd go hunting for quail and pheasant, right? So I don't know, is this my experience and I'm the only one? Have you seen this where you are? Do you feel like you're a foreigner in your own country? Or do you not? Do you feel this has actually enriched us? Do you feel this is a great thing for us? Do you feel that mass migration or mass illegal immigration has enriched the country? Explain it to me. Tell me in the comments. I want to hear what you think. That said, join me again tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.